Welcome back to another episode of the Future Lab. This is an Ohio Tech podcast where we're talking with all sorts of Ohio tech and innovation leaders that are doing so many different fantastically inspiring and interesting things out there. And today we have a very special guest who's kind of doing it at the heart of it all at The Ohio State University. So we have Dr. Ayanna Howard, who is an accomplished roboticist, entrepreneur, and educator. She became the dean of The Ohio State University's College of Engineering in March 2021. Previously, she was chair of Georgia Tech's School of Interactive Computing, as well as founder and director of the Human Automation Systems Lab. Her career spans higher education, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the private sector. Dr. Howard is the founder of Zyrobotics, and I probably got that wrong, so we'll get to that in a bit, a Georgia Tech spinoff company that develops mobile therapy and educational products for children with special needs. Its products are based on Dr. Howard's research, and among many of her accolades, Forbes named Dr. Howard to its America's Top 50 Women in Tech list. In May 2021, the Association for Computing Machinery named her the ACM Athena Lecturer in recognition of fundamental contributions to the development of accessible human robotic systems and artificial intelligence, along with forging new paths to broaden participation in computing. Dr. Howard, Dean Howard, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. This should be a great conversation.
Well, we're excited, and I'm just guessing based on your bio and reading it, you're newer to Ohio, right? You're newer to Columbus. It looks like, again, just kind of reverse engineering it, if I could a bit, that you were just in Atlanta, just in Georgia. But tell us about that. You're new. What brought you to the state?
I will tell you, so it's been less than a year, almost a year, but not quite. And I will tell you, it's the opportunity of really making a difference in the state of Ohio. One of the things, and there are a lot of jokes about Ohio, right? It's like Columbus, for example, is the place you fly over. You don't ever stop. But one of the things is when I was just looking for, what is this Ohio state? What do they do? What is Columbus? What is Ohio? I realized that being really it's the epicenter of the United States, which means that we have all industries here that are represented. And the range, if you think about technology, like anything you ask me, like, oh, well, do you do robotics? I'm like, yeah. Oh, do you do manufacturing? Yeah. You do computer science? Yeah. I mean, like everything you could think of in terms of technology is here. It's a fascinating place. And so that's really what attracted me as a fundamental geek and technologist. That excites me.
It is. It's fascinating to see it, and I think it's still a bit of a secret where places like Austin and Nashville, certainly, Atlanta's kind of beyond that in terms of it's become this global hub, certainly of the South. But it's almost like, I don't know if we want to get the word out too much more because we have a pretty good thing going here, which is a lot of fun. But before we dig a bit more into your background, and there's so much to it, which I know we'll get to. If you could tell us about the College of Engineering and what you're leading as the dean, because as you were just in your opening comments, you talked about artificial intelligence, you talked about robotics. And so when I think of robotics, there's the computer science side, but then there's also that hardware. And then computer science and kind of the software side to it. And so, today's day and age, what does a College of Engineering focus on? What is the diversity of disciplines that you all are teaching and the students, what the degrees they're getting?
Yeah, so one of the things I think about when you hear the word engineering, first off, a lot of people think of very specific things sometimes. But really, engineering is the building of things to really enable society to have good things to use, whether it's transportation, whether it's computing, whether it's traditional robotics in the automotive, or robotics for self-driving cars. And so when you think about engineering and what we are really focused on here in the college, it's to enable students and give them the tools necessary to build things, to imagine things and make them a reality. Environmental engineering is a thing. And it's not just dams and bridges. It's like looking at the environment, adding in sensors, thinking about all the things related to climate change and how do we make it so that we have less pollution. Like that's an environmental engineer, one aspect of it. So basically, we allow and enable students to learn anything that they want that's related to technology, the tools to build things, and then deploy them for good societal value and use for people and by people.
Yeah, that's an incredible overview. So thank you for that for someone who does not come from an engineering background, but so interesting. And so just with the diversity of all that goes into it, and it really seems as we think about tech and again you mentioned things like there's just so much from start to finish of traditional to kind of that next future, the software, the computer science side. But let's back up a bit and if we could talk about your background, how you got that tech bug. Is it something you always knew, this is the space you wanted to be in, or did you have, what was that path of discovery?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a roboticist.
Mm,
I didn't realize that I was a computationalist until much later. So when I was growing up, and still am, into anything related to science fiction, science fantasy, superheroes. And so that was just as a child, right? Like anytime a new show came on, I was glued to the television.
yep.
And so early on, I knew I wanted to build robotics. In fact, I wanted to build a bionic woman was my dream goal. So I knew I had to go into something related to technology, realize that it was engineering, but didn't know what that meant. And even constructing what it was as a technologist, I mean, I took courses in computer science and programming. I taught myself programming when I was in the third grade, and I'm that was something that was unique, which I did not know. It was just like, oh, my dad brought home a computer. He gave me a book, and I was like, oh, basic. Let me figure out what this is, right? With my little Commodore 64. That was like unusual. Did not know this, and so it was anything related to how do you design, how do you build, and even my engineering was a little bit of mechanical, a lot of computer science, some aspects of the computer engineering and designing architectures, and then of course elements of aero and all these other engineering disciplines in order to be a roboticist. So I was drawn to that, but again, it was multidiscipline even from the beginning.
Yeah, I think teaching it yourself at that's definitely not common with me. So that's really cool to hear. I'd love, your background were higher education, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the private sector. You've been part of startups, I'm sure working, advising boards, those types of things. One of the things that I find fascinating and the testament to, places like Ohio State is the ability to get academics and the research happening and the expertise on campuses, but then combine it with the private sector to whether it's spin out technologies or just take leading cutting edge research with building new products, new companies. What has that path been like for you where you've melded the business world with your academic side as well?
Well, one of the things about technology is there are stages of innovation. And I think with respect to academia, professors, students can play in each of those elements. So there's the things about what are the hard problems. When you're in the commercial space, sometimes it's like, yeah, that's a hard problem, but there's no way we can make a profit. We can't be negative because then you go bankrupt and you close your doors. And so sometimes the really hard problems you can't invest in necessarily in the corporate space. But in academia, you can. It could be something like, yeah, this is going to take us 20 years. And it's like, well, if you can find some students and a faculty member that's interested, you have 20 years to try to figure it out. And you think about all the things, even what we have that has really changed our evolution. Even today, when we talk about the aspect of COVID, for example, a lot of the basic research happened decades ago when people were just like, I have an idea, let's try it in a lab. There was
Yeah.
no commercial benefit, there was no profit, and yet here we are now. And so academia allows us to play in that space. Now, where we also have some academics that are interested in terms of the industry aspect is, well, how do you convert something that's fundamental research, that's designed in the lab, so that you can deploy it into the real world so that people
Mhm.
can use it and blue screen of death doesn't happen every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And so you have academics that also work with industry to try to figure out how do you translate and do that technology translation, which is another space that's beautiful in terms of
Yeah.
working if you're in industry as well as in academia, and that interplay, which is again, I think as academics you can play in any of these spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I'd love to ask about is artificial intelligence and AI. It's at least in the kind of the tech world, and if you're pulling up the Wall Street Journal, there's always buzzwords of technology. Sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's blockchain, sometimes it's crypto, all the different things that are out there that we just see. But artificial intelligence AI really interests me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, because of it seems it's growing in size and scope of governments and businesses and societies at large, understanding that there's a ton of power to it, but also there's there needs to be caution of doing it in a way that keeps humans and the human side of life at the forefront. And so if you could maybe as a professor get a short little lecture on what is AI, the power of it, as you're looking and you're seeing the headlines of all these stories and the role of artificial intelligence with governments and just society in general. What does that kind of mean to you? And what are some of your thoughts on that?
One of the things is that I think a lot of people, when they hear artificial intelligence, AI, they think about this, oh, there's this intelligent creature that's hiding in my machine that's making all my decisions. And in some elements and some aspects of the software that we use, that is going on, and maybe we're not even aware of. But really, when I think about AI in general terms, it's an algorithm that's usually cast in silicon, but it's an algorithm that is using real-time data to help us make decisions or make decisions. And that's really what it is. I think some of the fear is, what are those decisions? What is the data that's being used? And how is this impacting my life? Which it is an issue in some domains. But I want to kind of do a little bit of a retrospect. So I remember when I was working at NASA, this was in the year, it was about, I would say 91, 92. I remember I was sitting at work, and this was in the summer, and someone showed me something that was about blackboards. And I was like, what is this? They're like, you log in and you're chatting to someone else at another NASA facility. And I thought, oh my gosh, like this isn't like where you have to call in the modem. No, this is like real chat, right? And that was sort of the early aspects of email. And we were connected back then in NASA days. Now everyone is just like, what? You're not
Yeah.
connected? What? How could you live like this? Right. And so if you think about that generation, again, when my very first AI, artificial intelligence, neural network, machine learning was in 93, right? It was actually used and was deployed in the real world. Like, think about that, 93. And now we have high school students that can actually code up chatbots and deploy it on some on store, Apple or Google Play, and people can use it. Again, all these things existed. They were just a little bit more
Yeah.
in the labs and government. So there's really nothing to fear. I think one of the things is anyone can figure out what it is. But we do have to be careful of the data, and we do have to be careful of how we're using these systems to make sure they don't make decisions leaving us out of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm kind of taking this two-part question from part of your bio, where for the accessible human robotic systems and artificial intelligence, and then the second part of it is forging new paths to broaden participation in computing, and that's a big important topic. And in Ohio, I think we're lucky, and I'm thankful that we have a lot of great groups, a lot of great organizations, and individuals too, just on their own accord and own passion, that are really trying to grow the tech sector through whether it's K through 12 and getting students interested and passionate at an early age, or upskilling and reskilling for professionals that have been in their careers for some time. But could you talk a little bit about your efforts, your passion on that side? Because I think for us and some of the work we do, Ohio is this great place, but we also don't have necessarily the population trends that a lot of southern or western states might have. And I think we're passionate about the role tech can play in building great companies and careers, but it takes, all Ohioans giving them the opportunity to participate in that. And that's a pipeline of talent, which is a huge thing that businesses, one of their top concerns or challenges is talent. But if we can build and increase that pipeline, through maybe communities or parts of the state that haven't historically had those opportunities or kind of been at the forefront of that pipeline. That's a big focus. So can you talk a little bit about your passion and work in that part of it?
Yeah, so one of the things that concerns me, and I'm going to put on my computational hat,
Please.
is that, computation, i.e., learning how to program, knowing how to program, is becoming a fundamental skill for any job. We're seeing that. And so you would think, oh, well, I'm just going to be, X and X B. I just want to be a teacher, right? Like, why do I need to know computer science? Like, yeah, except for the fact that you will probably have to do your lessons plans around learning how to program some type of Python script so you can actually figure out what student needs what at what time. I mean, that's where we are. And if you think about it, nowadays, if someone is unable to read at an eighth grade level, we will put a lot of resources, especially at a younger age, in terms of, okay, we have to get this child to read, we have to figure this out. That is where we have to be with computer science, where if a child is basically unable to program or unable to understand the basic concepts of scripting by a certain age, as a society, as a community, it's like, oh, let's do our intervention so we can get this person on grade level. Because what I worry about is we aren't doing that as diligently as we need to. And therefore, as the jobs change, whether they are anywhere from working on the factory floor to being in an office, basically doing accounting,
Mhm.
that is going to be a required skill that is going to be needed for every single job. And so, thinking about the talent pipeline, really investing in the communities to provide from very early on. Computer science should not be just for the high school and middle school. It should be part of reading, writing, and math. We do it in kindergarten. Well, let's do things around computational thinking and these elements of computer science so that when a child first sees their computer science program, just like with math, when they first get into their
Yeah.
official math course, they're not freaking out because, oh my gosh, numbers.
Right.
Um, it's a reframing, and I'm so happy that at least in the state of Ohio, this is something that's really important, and we see it as a community that this is something we have to do for our communities and for our Ohioans.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And tech literacy it's been, as you said, great to see, kind of the passion and the interest, and whether it's businesses or government or schools that realize that and understand it, because it is vital. And I loved your comment about not just middle and high schools and getting it in as early as possible, because there a lot of these kids, I'm sure, are smarter than me with some of the stuff they're doing on iPads and other things, and make sure we can get all students and all children this stuff. So that's fantastic. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna transition to the second part of the show. All of our guests, we invite to answer four questions that are kind of quick. The answers don't necessarily have to be quick, but it's a fun way to see what the dean of an engineering school says, and what a venture capital says, what a startup founder, what a CIO might say. So the first one is, what is a challenge you're working to solve? And this can be, some people it's what the business they're building or the organization they're leading. Others, it can be something very small that has just been taking up a lot of effort and energy that maybe isn't top of mind when most people might answer that. So what's a challenge you're working to solve, Dr. Howard?
All right, so just one. I
Yeah.
will say
Yep.
one that's related to education. So we are in the College of Engineering working on growing our enrollment numbers. Um, so what that means, though, is that we want to do it in an equitable fashion. We want to make sure that the student who might be first gen or who's in a rural or urban environment is able to come here and succeed. And so this is a challenge because we're starting to think about what is our curriculum, what are our what we call the weed out courses or the gatekeeper courses that have impeded progress in some cases of some of our students. And then how do we work with companies to ensure that they are placed in quality jobs that will allow them to build and bring back to their, basically wealth back to their communities.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge, and it's really, really, really it's a large lift, but it's
Yeah.
something that we are leaning into.
I love that. I love that, and very, very timely answer with what we were just speaking about, which is fantastic. So, second question is, what is a favorite read, listen, or watch? So it can be a book, it can be a podcast, it can be a show, something fun to get your mind off of all the craziness of our world, or something academic or business related. No wrong answers here.
Yeah, so my favorite watch right now is the new Star Trek series, Discovery. So basically, my favorite watch is always whatever the Star Trek X is of the day. And so right now, that's the new series. So that's my favorite watch.
Awesome. I love that. That's so cool. All right. So, question number three. What is a problem you'd solve or a business you'd start if funding was no issue? So, we'll kind of take anything that you're working on or, tackling at the moment. But you win $100 million seed round and someone says, you got to solve something that's kind of been gnawing at you. What is it for you?
So actually, it's solvable. It's just not a company yet.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have to do a lot of is interacting with individuals. And I'm really good with details. I can remember your child's name, when you graduated, what's your major, but I can't remember names. And so what I would like to design is actually a contact lens that's connected to my computer, so that it can actually have signals that would come up with information. So if I see someone, I can like double tap, it recognizes that, oh, double tap means I need to do face recognition, look in your contacts, pull up the name, and say whatever that person's name in any facts. So it's basically a Rolodex, for those of you who remember Rolodex, but it's technology and it's infused so no one ever knows.
That's so cool. And as a follow up to that, I have to think that something like that is probably, you know, in the works, or at least, people are thinking about it. A prediction, and this doesn't, this can kind of just be off the wall and fun. But when do you think something like that, starts to come to the marketplace?
Yeah, so I know the elements of this exist so that a
Yeah.
full prototype could probably come out in 5 years,
Wow.
but it wouldn't be at the price point. It may not
Right.
necessarily have a market, but there's elements. For example, there's a company that's working on a contact lens to help with doing diabetes detection,
Wow.
right? So that's connected. It's
Yeah.
connected to so there's these elements that already exist
Yeah.
that can be put together.
That's so cool. It kind of some of the stuff Facebook and I think like Snapchat had like the goggles, and I'm sure that the team at Apple's working on something crazy. That, it's all coming, which is kind of cool. And so fourth and final one, and I'm excited to ask this one to you because you're newer to the state, newer to Columbus. What is your favorite place in Ohio? And so it can be again anywhere, but say you have friends or family visiting for the first time, where would you take them?
Um, If it was not winter, let's put that as a
Yeah.
caveat.
Yep.
Hocking Hills, actually.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place. It's just part of nature. It's gorgeous, gorgeous if you just want to be in a Zen moment.
Yeah.
So that's where I would take any friends or family, given that it's not winter.
Yeah. Hocking Hills is great, and sometimes in the snow, if it's nice and kind of fresh powder and all that, it can be. But this in between is sometimes tough with the mud and everything. So, but great answer, and I'm glad you've gotten to check it out before winter comes. Well, Dean Howard, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I could keep going, but we try to keep our episodes around this time. But is there anything you want to share or kind of plug that we didn't get to, or that you want to get out there?
No, I just, I want to reiterate, Ohio is this magic gem.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things that we need to do here is start promoting ourselves to the world a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's well said. And I think we're in that process. I think with COVID, kind of these outside the coastal hubs, opportunities have started to pop up, and it really we say this. It's an exciting time for tech in the state, and we're both sitting in Columbus, albeit remotely at the moment. But this city, there's so much to it. There's so much going on in different parts. I mean, you mentioned, your work with NASA. I think a lot of folks don't know that there's a NASA Glen up in Cleveland, and there's some really cool stuff happening in Dayton with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and since I mean everywhere, there's all these little nuggets, and I think getting those stories and getting those messages out is important, and we're starting to do that, which is really cool. But this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. A wonderful conversation, and for those listening, thank you so much. In the show notes, in the comments, we'll also kind of drop some information about Ohio State, the College of Engineering, so you can check it out. see what Dean Howard and her colleagues are up to. But this has been the Future Lab and Ohio Technology Podcast. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And again, Dean Howard, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it.